The wind that morning carried the damp scent of wilted flowers and wet earth, the kind of smell that settles heavy in anyone's chest. But it wasn't the weather that left Clara restless. It was the date, the one she'd circled in her mind for 5 years running, the only one she could never ignore, no matter how deeply she buried herself in work, endless meetings, or the lucrative contracts that had made her one of the city's most respected entrepreneurs. She stepped out of the car slowly, straightened her elegant coat, pulled her hair back firmly, as if fixing her posture was the only way to keep her emotions in check. The security guards offered to escort her, but she declined with a subtle wave. In that place, no one could do anything for her. Clara walked the narrow stone path, passing ancient graves and moss-covered statues. There was no hurry in her steps, but there was weight. The kind of weight that builds up on the shoulders of a mother who has buried her child. The grave lay just ahead. She knew its exact location, even though she avoided looking directly at it. But this time, something disrupted the silent ritual that repeated itself every year. Someone was standing there, 2 people. Clara narrowed her eyes, surprised and immediately irritated. No one visited that grave besides her. No one. As she drew closer, she realized it was a young woman, very young, in simple clothes, holding a dark-haired little girl who was crying softly. The young woman knelt as if pleading for strength to stand. The girl clutched a crumpled flower in her small hands. Clara stopped a few steps away. "Excuse me," she said, her tone deliberately cold. "What are you doing here?" The young woman spun around quickly, startled, as if caught doing something forbidden. Her eyes were red, and she pulled the girl tight against her chest in an instinctive protective gesture. "Sorry," she murmured. We're leaving now." The girl, however, ignored her mother's panic. She broke free from the embrace and ran to the headstone, touching the photo of Daniel mounted there. Then, in a low, choked voice, she said, "Mama, tell him I brought the flower he likes." Clara felt her stomach drop. "Daddy," the word echoed in her ears like a muffled gunshot. Her irritation froze, her firm posture trembled inside, even though outwardly it remained intact. "What is this child saying?" Her voice came out harder than intended. The young woman stood slowly, holding the girl's arm. "Ma'am, please, I don't want trouble. We just came to leave a flower and we're going." Clara took 2 steps forward, staring at them. "I want to know what you're doing at my son's grave." The girl turned, with wide, curious eyes, and stared at Clara for several seconds that felt far too long. Then, with the innocence only a child can have, she asked, "Are you my grandma?" Clara stood motionless. The young woman looked desperate. "No, don't say that," she whispered to the child, covering her mouth with her hand. "I'm sorry, miss, she doesn't understand." But the girl insisted, pushing her mother's hand away. "Mama said my daddy was good, and that he wanted me to have a grandma. Is that you?" Clara felt the air disappear for an instant. The child's face held something familiar, something painfully familiar. The eyes, the shape of the chin. It was like looking at an old photograph of her own son. But no, it was impossible. Daniel never mentioned anything. Never. "This is absurd," Clara said, trying to regain control. "You 2 need to leave right now. I don't know who you are, but I won't allow you to use my son's name to make up stories." The young woman finally lifted her gaze, full of guilt, fear, and a strange kind of courage. "I don't want anything from you. Nothing. I didn't come to ask for money, help, none of that. I only came because he asked." Clara frowned. "Daniel asked. What do you mean?" The young woman hesitated. She bit her lip. Her whole body trembled. He asked me, before he left, to bring our daughter here from time to time, so she'd know who he was, so she'd know that," her voice failed, "that he loved her so much." Clara felt her legs weaken for a second. "Daughter," she repeated, the word coming out almost as an incredulous whisper. The girl smiled timidly, wiping her tears with her arm. "I'm his daughter. My name is Sophia." Sophia. Clara took an involuntary step backward, as if the revelation had physically pushed her. "That's a lie." "This is a lie. My son! My son would have told me." The young woman stiffened, holding the girl by the hand. "He wanted to tell you, but everything happened so fast." She lowered her face. "I only did what I promised him. Bring her here on his birthday." Clara didn't know what to think. Her mind was a tornado of denial, fear, anger, doubt, hope, pain, everything mixed together, everything chaotic. Sophia tugged at her mother's shirt and whispered, "Mama, is he mad at us?" Clara closed her eyes for an instant. She didn't know what to answer. When she opened them, whatever she wanted to say vanished. Because the girl, that unknown, intrusive, impossible child, was standing there before her son's grave. And she had his smile. Not the smile from formal photographs, but that crooked smile Clara always said looked like he'd been up to something. The sensation hit her chest like a blow. The silence between the three stretched out, heavy and dense. And so, in that impossible moment, Clara's life began to change, even though she hadn't realized it yet. The silence that hung between Clara, the young woman, and the girl seemed impossible to break. It was as if the air had become too thick, as if any word spoken there needed to push through a wall of pain, doubt, and memories. Clara took a deep breath, trying to recover her composure, that impeccable posture she maintained in meetings, before investors, before the press. But here she was, just a wounded mother, accompanied by ghosts she still didn't have the courage to face. "I'm going to ask one last time," she said, now with a low, firm, controlled voice. "Who are you?" The young woman gripped Sophia's hand tighter, as if fearing the child would be torn away. "My name is Livia," she answered. "I met Daniel shortly before." Her voice wavered. "Before the accident." Clara felt her heart harden at the word accident. It was a trigger she'd avoided hearing since the day she received the call that changed her life. "Met him how?" Clara insisted. Livia opened her mouth but couldn't answer. Instead, she bent down to her daughter's height. "Come on, Sophia," she murmured nervously. "We're done here. Let's go." The girl seemed confused. "But I want to talk to Grandma." "She's not your grandmother," Clara interrupted forcefully, and her own voice surprised her. Sophia jumped back, frightened. Her eyes filled with tears, and her little lower lip trembled. Livia hugged her daughter, breathing deeply to keep from falling apart. "Please," she said, still calm despite her fear. "I don't want to fight. I swear I didn't come here for personal gain. I just kept the promise I made to him." Clara narrowed her eyes. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me exactly what's happening." Livia tried to walk toward the gate, but Clara stepped in front, blocking the path. "Are you going to push me?" Clara asked, in a tone that sounded more like a challenge. Livia shook her head immediately. "I would never do that. I just thought you wouldn't want to hear it. I already imagined it would be hard to believe." She took a deep breath. "But it's the truth." Sophia released the embrace and looked at the photo on the headstone again. "Daddy said he loves us," she murmured, almost as if remembering a memorized phrase. "He said that even far away, he'd watch over me." Clara felt her spine tingle. That phrase seemed so Daniel, so like him. A silly phrase, but one he would use to calm a child afraid of the dark. Clara shook her head, trying to push away that impression. "That could be your invention," she argued, looking at Livia. "I wouldn't make up something like that," Livia replied firmly. "And I didn't tell her that. She says it because she remembers." That detail left Clara even more disarmed, but pride still commanded her reaction. "Are you suggesting my son had a daughter with you and never told me?" Clara snapped. Livia looked away. "He wanted to tell you," she answered, almost in a whisper. "But he couldn't." Clara's hands clenched into discreet fists. "He couldn't because you're lying," she shot back. "Daniel never hid anything from me. He was impulsive, yes, but never deceitful." Livia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I don't know how to prove this to you now, but I have a way to prove it. I just didn't think this meeting would happen like this." Sophia, holding the crumpled flower, tilted her head toward her mother. "Are we in trouble?" Clara couldn't bear to see the girl's expression. It stirred something inside her that she thought had died since her son's funeral. "Sophia, come here." Livia pulled her daughter into her arms and began walking quickly away. "We're leaving." But Clara, seized by a mixture of confusion and anger, stepped forward. "You're not running away," she ordered. "Not until you explain this story properly." Livia turned suddenly, tears in her eyes, but still firm. "Daniel," her voice failed. "Daniel knew he might not come back to me. He left me a letter. I brought it today because I thought maybe one day I'd need to show it to you. But I didn't want to show it like this. I didn't want it to be this way." Clara felt the ground sway for a second. "A letter?" she repeated. Livia nodded, pulling a crumpled envelope from her bag. "He wrote it in his own handwriting. He knew he was at risk at work. He asked me to keep it. He asked that if she ever grew up without him, I'd explain everything to her. And he asked me to try to forgive him for not telling you." Clara stood motionless. It was the first time in years that something truly pierced the emotional armor she usually wore. The idea that Daniel could have written a letter, a farewell letter, was like opening a door she didn't even want to admit existed. "I have it with me," Livia continued. "If you want to read it, I'll let you." Clara hesitated. Doubt, pain, and anger tangled inside her in a knot that seemed impossible to untie. But before she could respond, Sophia tugged at her mother's coat and asked softly, "Did he write to me too?" The innocence of that question was another blow to Clara's heart. She took a deep breath, but her voice came out trembling anyway. "Show me that letter." Livia hugged her daughter, carefully took out the envelope, and held it with both hands, as if it were a sacred object. "Let's go over there," she murmured. "Somewhere calmer. I don't want Sophia to hear arguing." Clara didn't respond. She just followed behind them. And so, step by step, the second block of that story began to unfold, while Clara's life, without her realizing it, was about to turn upside down. Clara walked behind Livia and the girl to a small stone bench beneath an old tree. The wind swayed the leaves in a slow rhythm, as if the cemetery itself was holding its breath to hear what would come. Livia sat down, keeping Sophia in her lap. The girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder, exhausted from crying so much. Clara remained standing, arms crossed, as if any gesture of weakness would be an opening. The envelope was visibly worn, its edges folded from time and from being handled so many times. But there was something there that left Clara breathless. In the upper corner, her son's name written in the same handwriting he used when scribbling notes on the refrigerator. "Daniel." Just seeing it made her chest tighten. Livia extended the envelope. "He gave me this a few days before everything happened," she said, her voice low. "He seemed worried, distracted, like he had something very heavy on his mind. I asked several times, but he only said, 'If someday I'm not here, you give this to my mother.'" Clara felt the muscles in her face tremble. "And why did he hide this from me?" Her voice sounded bitter. "Why didn't he come to me? I was his mother." Livia took a deep breath. "Because he was afraid of your reaction. He said you were very strict with him, that you expected him to be perfect, and he didn't know how to tell you that he'd met someone, that he had a serious relationship, that maybe he'd taken on a responsibility too big with too little structure." She swallowed hard. "He thought you'd think he'd ruined everything." Clara felt her legs tingle. "He never needed to be afraid of me," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. Livia didn't argue. She just placed the envelope in Clara's hands. For a moment, Clara stared at it, motionless, as if the paper had the power to change her entire life, and she didn't know if she was ready for that. When she finally opened the envelope, her hands were shaking. The handwriting was unmistakable, slightly slanted letters, strong strokes, the same habit of exaggerating the D. She began to read, and each line seemed to cut through a layer of the armor she'd worn since the day she buried her own son. "Mom, I know you're going to be angry with me, and I deserve it. I should have told you before. I should have been brave, but I was afraid. Afraid of disappointing you, afraid of losing what was left of our relationship for good. I met someone. Her name is Livia. She treats me with a lightness I've never had. She believes in me in a way I thought no one ever would. And she is expecting a child. Mom, I'm going to be a father." Clara closed her eyes tightly. Those words were like punches straight to a heart she pretended not to have anymore. She took a deep breath and continued. I know I didn't do everything right. I know you wanted a different path for me. But for the first time, I felt like I was building something real, something mine. If someday I'm not here, and I say this because my work has risks I haven't always told you about, I want you to take care of what I've left in the world. Please, Mom. If something happens to me, don't turn your back on her or on our daughter. I love you, even when we fight, and I'll love my daughter the same way. Daniel. When Clara finished the letter, she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. The world seemed out of focus, as if everything was too far away, except for what was in her hands. Livia watched in silence, her face filled with sad respect, as if she understood that this letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the last thread connecting Clara to her son. He knew, Clara murmured, almost voiceless. He knew he was in danger. That's why he wrote. Livia nodded slowly. He told me that if something happened, you would be the only person capable of ensuring our daughter wouldn't have the difficult life he had. Clara pressed the envelope against her chest, as if it were the last thing remaining of her. Why didn't you look for me before? She asked, still hurt. Why only now? I tried, Livia answered honestly. I went to your company twice. I was turned away. They said you didn't see anyone without an appointment. Then, she took a deep breath. Then I got scared of seeming like a gold digger, scared you'd think I wanted money. All I wanted was for our daughter to know who her father was. The girl then lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. Did he write my name? She asked with wide eyes. Clara looked at her and for the first time couldn't maintain a hard expression. Clara tried to speak, but her voice failed. He wrote my daughter. Sophia smiled slightly, a smile so much like Daniel's it made Clara hold her breath. Livia discreetly wiped away tears. Sophia always asks about him. I'd say that one day she'd meet her father's family. I just never imagined it would be like this. Clara sat on the bench beside them, for the first time not looking like a statue of ice. I need to think, she murmured. This is a lot. Livia nodded. I understand. I don't want to pressure you. I just wanted to keep the promise I made to him. The wind blew hard, lifting some leaves around them, and in that instant, something inside Clara began to break, not in a destructive way, but in a way that finally allowed space for light to enter. The letter, the girl, the truth, all of it formed a puzzle she wasn't ready to assemble, but could no longer ignore. Clara stood slowly. I'm going to find out the whole truth, she said. And I'm going to do it my way. Livia tensed for a moment. Does that mean you believe me? Clara breathed, staring at Sophia for several seconds. It means I can no longer pretend that this child doesn't look exactly like my son. And so, in that moment, the first major turning point was made. There was no going back for any of the three. Clara left the cemetery with firm steps, but inside she felt like she was walking on cracked ground. Each movement of the car, each red light, each glance from the driver in the rearview mirror was a silent reminder of the letter folded inside her purse. She went straight to the office. The mirrored building reflected an image that matched her, impeccable, controlled, untouchable. But that morning the facade didn't match what she carried inside. Still, she crossed the reception as always, head held high, steady gaze, no one daring to ask questions. Good morning, Doctor. Clara, the receptionist greeted. She responded with a quick nod, walking to the elevator without slowing down. When the doors closed, the silence of the metal cube swallowed her. For the first time in a long while, she found herself alone with thoughts she usually ignored. I'm going to be a father. Take care of what I leave behind in the world. The phrases from the letter came in waves, as if they'd been forcibly engraved in her mind. The doors opened on the executive floor. Assistants, analysts, managers, all ready for another morning of important decisions. Clara crossed the corridor to her office. As soon as she entered, she closed the door harder than intended. Cancel the 9 o'clock meeting, she said through the intercom, and only interrupt me if it's truly urgent. Of course, Doctor, the assistant replied. Clara sat at the desk, opened her purse, carefully removed the envelope, and placed it in front of her. The paper was no longer just an object. It was almost a presence. For several minutes, she simply stared at her son's signature, the same one she'd seen on hospital documents, on the death certificate, on internship contracts, on the silly notes he used to leave when he was a teenager. You never needed to be afraid of me, she thought. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. She'd always been demanding, always pushed for performance, focus, responsibility. She'd encouraged her son to be strong, never to fail, never to falter. Maybe he'd learned to hide the vulnerable parts of life precisely because of that. A knock on the door brought her back. "Come in," she said, regaining her controlled tone. The assistant entered, holding a folder. "Doctor, your lawyer is already at the company. He arrived early. He's asking if you want to move up." "Send him in," Clara interrupted. A few seconds later, the lawyer appeared at the door. A middle-aged man, formal, accustomed to handling crises. "Good morning, Clara," he greeted. "Did something happen?" She didn't beat around the bush. "I need you to conduct an investigation," she said without preamble. "About a person. Two, actually." He frowned slightly. "Personal or business?" "Personal, but I want it treated with the same confidentiality as a corporate case." He nodded. "Of course. What's it about?" Clara took a deep breath. "A woman named Livia and a child named Sophia." She stared at the lawyer, gauging his reaction. "They claim to have a connection to my son." The lawyer raised his eyebrows, surprised, but maintained his professional composure. "What kind of connection?" "The woman says my granddaughter exists," Clara replied coldly, "and that my son is the father." He maintained silence for a few seconds, as if processing that delicate information. "I understand." He opened the folder and began taking notes. "Well, what do you want me to find out?" "Everything," she answered. "Where they live, where they work, financial history, background, anything that might indicate whether this is true or an attempted scam. I want facts, not assumptions." He nodded again. "And regarding DNA testing, is that something you're considering?" The question came direct, practical, professional. But for Clara, it sounded like a cut. "If it comes to that, I'll decide myself," she replied. "For now, I just want concrete evidence." The lawyer asked a few more technical questions, full names, approximate dates, any details she had. Clara told him what she remembered: the cemetery encounter, the letter, the promised photos, the girl's expression. None of this went on paper, but it stuck in memory. When he left the office, Clara was alone again. She looked out the window at the city in motion below. Cars racing, people crossing the street, lives continuing normally, while hers seemed to have stopped before an invisible fork in the road. By late morning, her schedule resumed. Meeting with the finance board, report analysis, quick decisions, numbers projected on the screen. She behaved as always, objective, firm, unbeatable. But from time to time, her gaze drifted to some random point on the table. One of the directors noticed. "Clara, is everything all right?" he ventured to ask. "Do you want us to reschedule?" She closed the folder firmly. "Everything's under control. Continue." Inside, nothing was under control. Later, at the end of the workday, the lawyer returned with the first information. "I managed to locate the young woman's address," he said, sitting across the desk. "She lives in a modest neighborhood, works 2 jobs, both with formal contracts. No record of lawsuits seeking child support, no attempts at formal contact with you." Clara pressed her fingers together. "And debts? Suspicious history?" she asked, almost wishing to find a reason to dismiss everything. "I have some preliminary data," the lawyer answered. "Small debts, common things for people struggling to survive, overdue electricity, installment purchases at the market. Nothing suggesting a scammer's profile. On the contrary, there are records of donations she's made to an institution that serves children. Small amounts, but consistent." This dismantled one of the defenses Clara was trying to build. "And the child?" she insisted. "Does she have a birth certificate?" "She does." He consulted the folder. The father isn't listed on the certificate, but the chosen name could be coincidence, but speak plainly, Clara demanded. The girl's middle name is the same as your son's. Clara brought her hand to her mouth, but disguised it, pretending to simply scratch her face. That doesn't prove anything, she murmured, as if needing to protect herself. It doesn't prove it, the lawyer agreed, but it also doesn't help someone who wants to discredit it. He closed the folder. Clara, may I speak as someone who's worked with you for years? He asked carefully. She stared at him, serious. Speak. If this is true and everything suggests there's a strong possibility, maybe it's not a threat, maybe it's an opportunity. She didn't respond. The legal risk here is small, he continued. What's at stake is something else. Your image, your family, your values. As hard as it may be, the truth tends to be less devastating than living while running from it. Clara remained silent for several long seconds. Continue the investigation, she decided finally. I want to see proof of the relationship, photos, messages, anything connecting my son to this story. He nodded and left. When the room was empty again, Clara leaned back in her chair, exhausted. It wasn't the physical tiredness of a day's work. It was a deep emotional exhaustion, accumulated over the years when she chose to numb herself instead of feel. She picked up the letter once more. She reread the passage where Daniel said, "If something happens to me, don't turn your back on her, or on our daughter." She closed her eyes. Maybe he really had been afraid of her reaction. Maybe, without realizing it, she'd taught her own son to hide the most human part of life from her. Now, however, life was placing that truth back in front of her, and no matter how much she tried to resist, the image of the girl before the grave, calling her son Daddy, and asking if she was Grandma, kept reappearing. Denying it became harder with each memory, but accepting it also seemed frightening. Between these two extremes, Clara decided one thing: she wouldn't be fooled, and she wouldn't keep running. She would face the past, whatever it cost. And from that silent decision, the path to the story's next development began to form, even though no one there, not even her, was fully aware of it yet. 2 days passed since the cemetery encounter, and Clara tried to follow her usual routine. Meetings, documents, high-impact decisions, but the restlessness wouldn't leave. The letter was always there, in her purse, as if it weighed more than the car's metal, more than the entire company building. She tried to pretend she was in control, but control slipped through the cracks in her heart, a heart she'd tried to freeze for the last 5 years, and that now insisted on waking up. On the morning of the 3rd day, she finally made a decision. She picked up the phone, found the number she'd written down, and sent a short, direct, formal message, very much her style. Need to talk. Today. Coffee at 3 p.m. downtown. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Livia took almost an hour to respond. I'll be there. The cafe Clara chose was discreet, elegant, with dark wooden tables and large windows. She arrived early, as she always did, sat in the most private corner, and ordered only tea, which went cold without her noticing. When Livia entered, she seemed out of place in that sophisticated environment. Simple clothes, worn bag, tense steps. And yet, there was something dignified about her, something that didn't apologize for its own existence. She walked to the table. "Thank you for coming," Clara said without standing. "I'm the one who's grateful for the chance to explain," Livia replied, sitting down slowly. Clara observed her attentively in silence, like someone analyzing an important piece before making a decision. "You said you had proof," Clara began. "I want to see all of it." Livia nodded, pulling a thin folder from her bag. She placed it on the table carefully, as if the contents were too fragile. "I brought everything I have." "I didn't hide anything." Clara kept her gaze fixed. "Open it." Livia opened the folder. The first thing she pulled out was a set of printed photos. Simple photos. Everyday moments, but loaded with something that made Clara lose her breath for a second. Daniel smiling. A smile Clara hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine, open, light. In one photo, he and Livia were embracing, faces pressed together, laughing at something clearly not staged. In another, Daniel held a small pink pacifier just purchased, making a funny face. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Livia continued, pulling out more photos. Now, photos of Daniel with her pregnant belly. He had his hand extended, making the silly gesture he'd made since childhood, when he wanted to feel the baby kicking. Clara looked away for a moment to control her breathing. "There's more," Livia said, her voice soft. She took out her phone and opened a video gallery. "I know I could have deleted everything, but I kept it. For Sophia, so she'd know who her father was." Clara hesitated but ended up taking the phone. The videos began to play. Daniel appeared in the first one, fixing his hair, joking, "If my mum sees me holding this belly, she'll have a heart attack, huh?" Clara clenched her hand on the table. His voice, God, it had been years since she'd heard it. In the second video, Daniel tried to assemble a crib, clearly clueless. "You tightened that screw wrong," Livia's voice said from behind the camera. "I'm practicing the clumsy dad part. It's charming," he responded. Clara had to put the phone down for a few seconds, or she'd lose control right there. "Enough," she said, but not with anger, with pain. Livia took back the phone, respecting the boundary. "I have something else," she said, pulling a small box from her bag. It was dented, as if it had been stored for a long time. "Daniel bought this before Sophia was born. He said he wanted her to know where his heart was." Clara opened the box. Inside was a small chain with a crescent moon pendant, the same symbol Daniel had worn since childhood, a silly habit he said brought luck. Clara almost dropped the box. She remembered. He'd gotten that pendant at age 8, and he always said he'd give something similar to his daughter one day. She closed the box with involuntary delicacy, as if touching something sacred. "Before you ask," Livia said, "I don't want anything from you. Not money, not a house, not a lawsuit. I just want Sophia to know where she came from, that's all." Clara leaned back, trying to recover her composure. "All this only proves a relationship. It doesn't prove paternity." Livia nodded. "I know. But there's something that does prove it." She pulled out another photo. Clara's world stopped when she saw it. It was Daniel holding newborn Sophia, his face tired but radiant. He was crying. Clara was certain of it. She recognized that gleam in his eyes, and he was saying something in the video accompanying the photo, which Livia pressed to play. "My daughter, the first thing I'm going to do when you grow up is take you to meet your grandmother, even if she gets mad at me. Even if she makes that face like she doesn't approve of anything. You deserve to know where you come from." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. He said that? He said it all the time," Livia answered. "He wanted you close. He just didn't know how to tell you." Clara took a deep breath, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Sophia, who'd been with a babysitter in a corner of the cafe, finally noticed her mother. The girl ran to the table, stopped beside Livia, and looked at Clara with the same curious gaze from cemetery day. "Grandma?" she asked, softly, like someone reopening a wound. Clara swallowed hard. "Don't call me that," she said, but her voice came out weak, without true authority. Sophia tilted her head. "But you're my daddy's mom." The childish logic was impossible to counter. Clara looked away. Something inside her was breaking, but it wasn't destruction. It was surrender. The girl then did something no one expected. She picked up the chain from the box, looked at the pendant and said, "My daddy gave me this. In my dream." Clara froze. "What dream?" she asked, without realizing. "He said I didn't need to be afraid when I was sad," Sophia answered, "and that Grandma would come one day." An enormous silence settled between the three. Clara finally raised her gaze and faced the child. Her eyes, the same stubborn gleam, the same silent courage, the same Daniel from 20 years ago. And it was there, in that cafe, before irrefutable proof, revived memories, and an inherited smile, that Clara realized she wasn't facing a lie. She was facing a piece of her son. And that was impossible to ignore. Clara returned home that night with her mind overtaken by a force she didn't recognize. It wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It was something far more complex. something resembling guilt, but mixed with a kind of hope she tried to crush as soon as it appeared. She couldn't sleep. She tossed from one side to the other in bed while the lawyer's words echoed. Maybe it's not a threat. Maybe it's an opportunity. But nothing hammered at her more than the phrase spoken by Sophia, with that innocence only children possess. He said Grandma would come one day. How could a child invent something like that? How could she reproduce traits, gestures, phrases that Clara had recognized since Daniel was small? It was impossible to ignore. At 2 in the morning, Clara got up, turned on the study lights, and spread the photos, videos, and documents across the desk as if assembling an emotional puzzle. Each piece told part of a story she never knew existed, and that, even unwillingly, she wished were true. The next morning, her phone rang while she was reviewing reports. It was the lawyer. "I got new information," he said, "about the young woman's situation. I don't know if you want to hear it now." "Tell me." "She lost one of her jobs yesterday." Clara clenched her jaw. "Why?" "Absences," he replied. "Witnesses say she had anxiety attacks this week, and it seems her daughter has been sick since last night. High fever. They don't have health insurance. The situation isn't good." Clara felt a stab in her chest. "And where are they now?" "At the public hospital in the neighborhood where they live." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before he added, "Clara, maybe you should go there." She stood motionless. It was as if someone had placed two paths before her at the same time. One path she'd always followed, distance, coldness, total control, and a completely new path, vulnerability, connection, the risk of getting hurt, but also of finding something she thought she'd lost forever. She didn't respond. She just grabbed the car keys. The hospital was simple, crowded, with stuffy corridors and people waiting for care. It was a stark contrast to Clara's life, made of comforts and resources. But there, in that chaotic setting, she saw Livia sitting in a plastic chair, with Sophia lying in her lap, her face hot and sweaty, her little eyes closed. Livia was stroking her daughter's hair with silent desperation. Upon noticing Clara, she stood up, surprised, tired, confused. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" Clara took a deep breath, as if she needed to prepare for each word. "The lawyer told me. I came to see how she is." Livia tried to smile, but it was a broken smile. "She's burning up. The fever won't break. They said she might need IV fluids, but there's no bed available right now, and—" Her voice wavered. "I did everything I could." Sophia stirred in her lap, moaning softly. "Mama, it hurts." That small murmur pierced right through Clara. Without thinking twice, she called a nurse passing by. "I want this child seen immediately." The nurse looked with suspicion until Clara showed her badge and name. "I'm Clara Menezes." The nurse's expression changed in a second. "Yes, of course. I'll see what I can do." Within minutes, they opened a space for Sophia in a smaller room. They started an IV, gave medication, ran initial tests. Livia stayed beside her daughter the whole time, completely vulnerable, like a mother trying to be strong, because she has no choice. Clara observed everything, silent. The girl held her mother's hand so tightly her fingers turned white. "Mama, will you stay?" "I'm not leaving your side," Livia answered, her voice choked. Sophia opened her eyes for an instant and stared at Clara, as if recognizing something familiar. "You came," she murmured, almost inaudible. Clara felt her chest tighten. This wasn't a coincidence. This child wasn't an invention. She was real. She was a piece of Daniel. And she was suffering. Hours passed. The fever began to subside. Sophia now slept peacefully, breathing more easily. Livia was exhausted. "I know what you must be thinking," she said when they finally sat down, "that I shouldn't have looked for you, that I should handle everything alone, but I don't have anyone. And I didn't ask for anything, nothing, not child support, not help. I just wanted her to know who he was." Clara took a deep breath. "I'm not here to discuss that now." Livia lowered her head. "I know you still think I might be lying, but I would never have the courage to use my daughter for that." Clara didn't respond immediately. She observed Sophia for a long moment, that little scrunched face as she slept, the tiny hand holding the sheet, the way she turned to her side. It was the way Daniel slept when he had a fever, when he was small. It was impossible not to see. "Did you lose your job because of me?" Clara suddenly asked. Livia was surprised. It wasn't exactly because of that. But yes, I missed the day after. I was shaken. And now that Sophia got sick, I lost the second one too. But I'll manage. I always do." Clara stared at her, serious. "That won't happen anymore." Livia frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean this child won't suffer because of past decisions." Clara's tone was firm, decided. "She won't lack medical care. She won't lack school. She won't lack anything." Livia was speechless for a few seconds. Are you wanting to help?" Clara hesitated. Pride tried to pull her back, but the truth was already crushing any resistance. "She's my responsibility too," Clara said, without beating around the bush. A tear ran down Livia's face, quick, unexpected, almost forbidden. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Clara interrupted. "Just take care of her. Leave the rest to me." And then, as if fate wanted to seal that change, Sophia opened her eyes, drowsy, and murmured, "Grandma?" This time, Clara couldn't say no. She just touched the girl's little hand, very slowly, like someone holding a piece of the past that came back asking for care. And in that silent instant, a decision formed inside her. She would protect that child, whatever it cost. And this commitment, which she still couldn't admit aloud, would be what led the story directly to its climax. In the following days, Clara's routine changed without her noticing. The car that used to go straight from the penthouse to the company now made an inevitable detour. It stopped at the hospital first. She entered discreetly, dark glasses, sober clothing, but the nurses already knew the way. Just seeing her and someone would comment quietly, "It's the grandmother of the girl in room 12. Clara pretended not to hear, but inside, that phrase did something strange. It didn't hurt, as she'd imagined. It warmed. Sophia had improved a bit with the first medication. The fever had subsided, the IV had helped, and she could smile occasionally. On one of the visits, when Clara entered the room, she found the girl drawing on a sheet of paper. "What are you doing?" she asked, maintaining a controlled tone. Sophia lifted the drawing, proud. There were 3 figures with round little hands and big heads, typical of a child's drawing. "It's my family," she said. "Here's me, here's Mama, and here's you." Clara stood several seconds unable to respond. Livia, leaning against the window, watched in silence, afraid to say anything that might break that moment. "You drew me with a heart on my chest?" Clara asked, noticing the details. "Yeah," Sophia answered, animated. "Because Daddy said your heart was strong. I just put it there so he wouldn't forget about you." Clara looked away. The heart she'd sworn to hide behind contracts, glass walls, and cold phrases was there, drawn by a child who didn't even know the weight of the words, she said. But what seemed like an upward curve suddenly became a steep decline. That night, Clara's phone rang insistently at 3 in the morning. "Dr. Clara," it was an anxious nurse's voice. "Can you come to the hospital? Sophia got worse." She didn't think, didn't ask for details. "I'm on my way." The corridor that early morning seemed longer than usual. White lights, strong smell of disinfectant, hurried footsteps of doctors from one side to the other. When Clara reached the room, she saw what she feared most. Sophia was pale, breathing rapidly, eyes half open, while a nurse adjusted the IV and another checked vital signs. Livia, beside the bed, cried silently, holding her daughter's hand with both hands as if wanting to prevent her from slipping away. "What's happening?" Clara asked, her voice louder than intended. A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. "The girl had a sudden deterioration," he explained. "The tests we did yesterday indicated a complication we hadn't seen initially. She needs a more complex procedure. And fast." "Then do it," Clara responded without hesitation. The doctor took a deep breath. "It's not that simple. The hospital doesn't have complete infrastructure for this type of intervention. She needs to be transferred to another facility, specialized, and the costs are high, very high. Livia squeezed her daughter tighter. I'll pay. I'll figure it out, she said desperately, knowing she had no way. Clara looked at the doctor like someone giving an order, not making a request. Money isn't a problem. Arrange everything. Now, he hesitated. I understand, but there are protocols, authorization paperwork, waiting list. She's not a piece of paper, Clara cut him off. She's a child, and she will be treated. The doctor stared at her for a few seconds, recognizing they're not only the powerful businesswoman everyone knew, but a grandmother in desperation. I'll see what I can do, he said finally, but be aware that the transfer will attract attention, documents, authorizations, advanced transport. You're a public figure. This won't go unnoticed. Clara took a second to process. Assistants, board members, image, press, all of it flashed through her mind like a quick film. And then, for the first time, she felt something very clear inside. None of that mattered more than that little girl. Then let it attract attention, she replied, but she's leaving here alive. Less than 2 hours later, the specialized hospital was already mobilized. An equipped ambulance entered the parking lot. Nurses and doctors organized documents hurriedly. The other hospital's team requested confirmation from the responsible party. Who signs for the child? Asked an administrative employee, paper in hand. Livia opened her mouth, but her voice failed. Clara stepped forward and took the pen. I'll sign. Relationship, the employee insisted, without taking her eyes off the form. Clara looked at Sophia, connected to the IV, too small on that stretcher. The girl opened her eyes slowly, as if fighting not to fall asleep, and whispered, Will you come with me, Grandma? That's when any doubt disappeared. Grandmother, Clara answered, staring directly at the employee. I'm the grandmother. The word came out firm, definitive, almost like an emotional signature that came before the ink on paper. She signed, and in that stroke she assumed much more than medical responsibility. She assumed a story. The transfer was quick but conspicuous. Photos leaked. Curious people recorded videos of the well-known businesswoman accompanying an ambulance in the early morning hours, holding an unknown child's hand. When dawn broke, the first questions were already on social media. Who is the girl with Clara Menezes? Secret daughter, granddaughter, hidden affair? Scandal in the businesswoman's family? At the new hospital, while doctors explained the procedure's risks, Clara's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from the press office, calls from the board, notifications saying, this is going to become news. One of her main advisors managed to get through. Clara, you need to get out of there. You can't expose yourself like this. We'll control the narrative, issue a statement, deny any connection until we're certain. No, she answered, cutting him off. No, he repeated, incredulous. I won't deny my granddaughter's existence, she said for the first time aloud, without hesitating on the word. And I won't hide while she's in a surgery room. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Think about your image, the stock prices, the contracts. For the first time in a long while, she interrupted, I'm thinking about my family. If it costs my image, so be it. I can rebuild my career. What I can't do is look in the mirror knowing I turned my back on my son's daughter. She hung up. Livia, sitting on the corridor bench, heard part of the conversation but didn't comment. Her face was hidden in her hands, eyes red. I didn't want to bring trouble to your life, she murmured. Clara sat beside her. You brought back something I thought I'd lost forever, she retorted, without taking her eyes off the door of the room where Sophia was. It was hours of waiting. Each time a doctor passed, both their hearts raced. Each movement of the clock's hand seemed like an eternity, until finally the door opened. The doctor in charge appeared, still masked, with a tired but calm expression. Livia jumped from the chair. Doctor! He took a deep breath. The procedure was difficult. She reached a dangerous threshold, but she responded well. She's still not completely out of danger. We'll need observation, but for now, we can say she's stable." Livia brought her hands to her face, crying with relief. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her legs almost fail. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice choked. "One at a time for now," the doctor answered. "But yes, you can go in." Livia entered first. She spent a few minutes speaking softly to her daughter, kissing her forehead, crying and giving thanks. When she came out, she did something she hadn't done since the beginning of all this. She extended her hand to Clara in a sign of true gratitude. "If it weren't for you," she began, not knowing how to finish. "If it weren't for your effort alone until now, maybe I never would have had the chance to do anything," Clara responded. "Now, let me see my granddaughter." She went in. Sophia was small, fragile, with tubes and bandages, but alive, breathing, fighting. Clara approached slowly, as if entering a sacred place. She gently touched her hand. The girl opened her eyes, tired, and smiled that crooked way she knew so well. "I knew," Sophia murmured. "Knew you'd come." "You knew?" Clara asked, her voice low. "Daddy said so," the girl answered, already almost falling asleep again. "He said that when I was really scared, you'd show up." This time, Clara didn't hold back the tears. They fell silently, wetting Sophia's little hand. There, in that cold room, surrounded by machines, monitors, and white lights, one thing became clear. The climax wasn't just the fight for the girl's life. It was Clara's fight to recover her own humanity. And without realizing it, she'd already begun to win. The following days were unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. She was used to racing against deadlines, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, entering rooms where every word she spoke shaped the destiny of entire companies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her to wait for a child to recover in a cold hospital bed. And yet, there she was, every day. The schedule didn't matter. The rain didn't matter. The press stationed outside trying to extract any detail didn't matter. She entered through the internal garage, passed discreetly through the corridors, and sat beside Sophia's bed, as if that were the only place in the world she should be. And maybe it really was. Sophia improved slowly. Each improvement seemed like a victory, each controlled fever like a small miracle. Clara watched everything, as if witnessing her own life's second chance. One day, while stroking Sophia's hair, she heard a soft voice behind her. "May I come in?" It was Livia, holding a bag with folded clothes. She looked tired, but there was something new about her, a calm that hadn't existed before. "Of course," Clara responded, moving away just enough for her to approach her daughter. Livia placed her hand on the girl's face, her expression filled with gratitude. "She's better because you helped," she said, briefly looking at Clara. Clara shook her head. "No, she's better because she's strong. She inherited that from her father." Livia didn't argue. She remained silent for a few minutes, as if gathering courage. "I know your life turned upside down," she began, "because of us. If you want us to disappear after she leaves here, we'll disappear. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to disrupt your career, your image, your peace." Clara stared at her as if she hadn't understood. "Thinking you disrupted my life," she said with a sigh, "is believing my life was whole before you came. But it wasn't." Livia's eyes widened, surprised. "What do you mean?" Clara looked at Sophia, sleeping with light breathing. "I had everything, except this." Then she placed her hand on the girl's. "This piece of my son that I didn't even know existed. This light that came back when I thought I was condemned to darkness." Livia looked away, moved. "I never wanted you to feel obligated." "I'm not obligated," Clara replied. "I'm choosing." And that verb, to choose, was the first true bridge between the two women. When Sophia could finally leave the hospital, the doctor explained she'd still need care, good nutrition, constant monitoring. It was a long recovery, but without major risks. Livia seemed lost before so much responsibility and so few resources. I'll manage. I always have." She tried to smile, but the smile was cracked. "Even if I have to work 3 jobs." That's when Clara did something that surprised even herself. "You're going to stay with me," she said, without beating around the bush. Livia blinked, confused. "What?" "At my house." Clara maintained a firm tone, like someone making a business decision, but there was something much more human there. "At least until Sophia is fully recovered, and until you're stable. I won't accept arguments." Livia seemed frozen between relief and fear. "But I don't have clothes for that. No means no." "You're taking care of my granddaughter," Clara interrupted. "And no one takes care of someone they love, sleeping in a one-room apartment and working until they collapse. I won't let you return to that reality." Livia opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Sophia, hearing the conversation still groggy, murmured, "Are we going to live with you, Grandma?" Clara tucked the girl's hair behind her ear and answered, "Yes, but only while you get completely strong." "I'm already strong," Sophia said with that crooked smile. "Daddy said I'm just like him." Clara felt her chest warm in a way she hadn't felt since Daniel was small. The arrival at Clara's house was silent, almost solemn. The impeccable, cold, overly organized mansion seemed like a museum dedicated to silence, until Sophia ran in to look at everything with curious eyes. "Wow," she murmured, amazed at the size of the place. "Can we really live here?" Livia touched her daughter's arm awkwardly. "It's just for a few days, sweetheart. We won't be a bother." Clara, however, was already opening the door to a room that hadn't been used in years. "You'll stay here." It was Daniel's old room. The decoration had been maintained, the shelves with his favorite books, the desk where he made drawings, the school trophy, the blue bedspread he chose when he was 10. Sophia entered slowly, as if she'd entered a magical place. She touched the trophy carefully. "This was my daddy's." "It was," Clara answered, her voice choked. The girl smiled. "He's cool." Clara closed her eyes for a second, trying to contain the emotion. "He was," she corrected, "much more than you can imagine." Livia watched in silence, with discreet tears she tried to wipe before anyone noticed. "Clara," she began hesitantly, "I really don't know how to thank you. I don't even know how to repay all this." Clara took a deep breath. "Let me be part of her life," she said. "That's all I want." Livia nodded. "Then, welcome to our life." The following days were a new kind of routine, something neither of them imagined living. Clara woke early to check on Sophia. She prepared coffee for both. She helped the girl get dressed, comb her hair, take her medicine. The mansion, once silent as an emotional tomb, now had laughter, running footsteps, colorful drawings scattered across the living room table. And for the first time since Daniel died, Clara felt the air inside the house was breathable. One quiet afternoon, Clara was watching Sophia draw on the veranda when the girl looked up and asked, "Why are you sad, Grandma?" Clara froze. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I was just thinking." "About Daddy?" Sophia asked, with a sensitivity no child that age should have. Clara took a deep breath. "Yes, about your daddy. He said you were nice," Sophia said, smiling. Clara had to look away to keep from crying. "He said that?" "He did," the girl answered, animated. "He said you took care of him, and that if he wasn't here, you'd take care of me too." Clara brought her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the trembling. That was more than coincidence. It was a second chance. It was a piece of her son speaking through that child. Livia appeared at the door, calling Sophia inside. The girl ran to her, but stopped before leaving and added, "I like it here. It feels like a real home." When she left, Clara stared at the horizon. It was true. For the first time in years, that house felt alive. It felt like a home. And with that, the story moved toward its final transformation, the one that would lead Clara to face everything still remaining: fear, the past, and the whole world if necessary. The days that followed were different from anything Clara could have imagined for this phase of her life. Before, her routine was predictable, perfectly calculated, and silent, too silent. Now the house had the sound of small footsteps, spontaneous laughter, curious questions, and drawings scattered everywhere. Sophia transformed the space into something alive, and in the midst of it all, Clara felt needed, not as a businesswoman, not as a boss, not as a public figure, but as someone who mattered to a child who had her son's smile and the most sincere heart she'd ever seen. One sunny afternoon, while Clara organized some papers in the living room, she heard little footsteps approaching. Sophia entered carrying a colorful sheet. "I made something for you," she said, proud. Clara took the drawing. 3 figures holding hands, one larger, one medium, one tiny. Above them, the word family written in crooked letters. "Is that you?" Clara asked. "Yes," Sophia answered, pointing. "This one's Mama, and the big one is you." Clara smiled, but her eyes filled with tears. "Why am I the biggest?" Sophia shrugged as if it were obvious. "Because you protect everyone." It was impressive how such a simple phrase could dismantle everything Clara had built to appear strong. She took a deep breath, trying to hide the emotion, but couldn't for long. "Thank you, sweetheart. This drawing will go in the most important place in the house." "Where?" Sophia asked. Clara stood up, walked to the hallway, and carefully taped the drawing right on her office door. "Here," she said, "where I pass every day and remember what really matters." Sophia smiled, satisfied. "I'll make another one tomorrow," Clara laughed. "I'll want them all." Livia watched the scene from the doorway with a shy smile. "She's never felt so part of something," she said later, while they had coffee in the kitchen. "She always only had me, and I always only had her, but here, it feels different." Clara looked at her cup. "It's different. For me too." There was a comfortable silence between them. "You changed her life," Livia said quietly. "She changed mine," Clara responded, with honesty for the first time. Life began to stabilize in a new rhythm. Clara continued helping with everything: appointments, clothes, school, food. But she also insisted on something that took Livia by surprise. "I want to offer you a job," she said one morning. "At my company." Livia's eyes widened. "What?" "But I don't have education. I don't have experience. You have strength," Clara interrupted, "and character, and you're trustworthy. The rest can be learned. No one starts knowing everything. Not even me." Livia was silent for a few seconds, absorbing it. "I accept," she said, moved. "Thank you, really, thank you." Clara nodded, but added, "I'm not offering this out of pity, but because I believe in you. But also because I know that if Sophia grows up by your side with stability and security, she'll be everything Daniel dreamed she'd be." Livia cried without shame. From that day on, it wasn't just 2 lives Clara was helping. It was the life of an entire family. A family that, in the most unexpected way possible, had become hers too. Months passed. Sophia was fully recovered. She ran through the house, played in the garden, laughed loudly, as if none of it had been such a hard battle. And then, one calm afternoon, Clara called her. "Sophia, come here for a moment." The girl ran to her with a doll in hand. "What is it, Grandma?" "I want to show you something." Clara took her to the room that had been adapted just for her. It was simple, full of color, with shelves of children's books and a panel where she displayed her drawings. Clara pointed to a beautiful box placed on the desk. "This belonged to your daddy." Sophia touched the box carefully, as if it were treasure. "Can I open it?" "You can." Inside were photos, small objects, notes, the chain Sophia already knew, and a card. Sophia picked up the card. "What does it say?" Clara took a deep breath. "It says, 'For my daughter. If one day I can't be by your side, I want you to know I loved you from the first second.'" Sophia smiled, but her eyes filled with tears. "I love him too." Clara hugged her tightly, smelling the soft scent of the girl's hair, feeling the warmth of her body, and in that embrace, something inside her finally found peace. It was as if life had returned a piece she thought she'd lost forever. That same night, Clara stood watching the girl sleep in the new room, hugging her favorite doll. Then she walked to the veranda, where Livia was sitting. "She fell asleep quickly today," Livia said. "She's happy," Clara replied. Livia smiled, tired but fulfilled. "Thank you for everything, Clara. I know you had 1,000 reasons to push us away, but you chose to do the opposite." Daniel isn't here anymore, Clara said, looking at the dark sky. But his daughter is, and as long as she's here, my love for him never dies. Livia wiped away a tear. He would be proud of you. Clara took a deep breath, letting that comment warm something deep inside her. And I would be proud of him too, she responded. If I'd known this side of his life before, maybe everything would have been different. Maybe, Livia said, but we're here now, and that's what matters. The two remained silent, watching the city lights, and they didn't need to say anything more. The bond was there, strong, true, irreversible, and for the first time since Daniel's death, Clara didn't feel alone. She had a family, a new chance, a new life. 3 years later, the morning sun illuminated the large garden where Sophia ran barefoot through the grass, chasing butterflies. Her laughter echoed through the space that was once so silent, now filled with life. Clara sat on the veranda, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the scene with a peaceful smile. Livia sat beside her, checking her phone. She was now a department manager at the company, thriving in ways she never imagined possible. She's growing so fast, Livia commented, looking up at her daughter. Too fast, Clara agreed, but there was no sadness in her voice, only gratitude. Sophia ran toward them, holding something in her hands. Look what I found, she exclaimed, showing a small white flower. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Clara said. It's for Daddy, Sophia replied naturally, as she did every year. For when we visit him tomorrow. Tomorrow was Daniel's birthday. The date that once brought only pain now carried something different, remembrance mixed with celebration of what remained. We'll take the most beautiful flowers, Clara promised. Sophia nodded and ran back to play. Livia turned to Clara. You know, I never imagined we'd be here, like this, as a family. Clara looked at her with genuine warmth. Neither did I. But I've learned something these past years. What's that? That sometimes the most important things in life come from the places we least expect, and that it's never too late to open your heart. Livia reached over and squeezed Clara's hand. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you, Clara replied, for giving me back a reason to live. Later that evening, after Sophia had gone to bed, Clara entered her office. The drawing from years ago was still there on the door, now faded and worn at the edges, but she'd never replaced it. She opened a drawer and pulled out Daniel's letter, the one she'd read 1,000 times, the one that changed everything. She unfolded it carefully, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. I did what you asked, my son, she whispered. I took care of them, and they took care of me. She looked at the photo on her desk, a new one taken just last month. The three of them, Clara, Livia, and Sophia, arms around each other, all smiling, a real family. Behind them in the photo, barely visible, was Daniel's old room, now Sophia's room, where his memory lived on not through grief, but through the joy of the child he'd left behind. Clara folded the letter, placed it back in the drawer, and turned off the light. As she walked through the hallway, she heard soft humming coming from Sophia's room. She paused at the doorway and saw the girl sitting up in bed, singing a lullaby to her doll, the same lullaby Clara used to sing to Daniel when he was small. Sophia noticed her and smiled. Can't sleep? Clara asked softly. I was just thinking, Sophia said. About what? About how lucky I am to have Mama and to have you, and to know my daddy loved me even though I never met him. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, fighting back tears. You know what, Sophia? I think your daddy knew exactly what he was doing when he asked your mama to bring you to meet me. What do you mean? I think he knew that we'd save each other. You, your mama, and me. We all needed each other. We just didn't know it yet. Sophia thought about that for a moment, then wrapped her small arms around Clara's neck. I'm glad he brought us together, Grandma. Clara held her close, breathing in the moment, imprinting it in her memory. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. She tucked Sophia back into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same words she used to say to Daniel. Sweet dreams, my love. I'll be right here if you need me. I know, Sophia murmured, already drifting off. You always are. Clara turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of Sophia's breathing. The pain of losing Daniel would never completely disappear. But standing there in the home that was once a mausoleum of grief and was now filled with laughter and light, Clara realized something profound. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It finds new ways to exist. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to let it, it comes back to you in the most unexpected forms, in the smile of a child you didn't know existed, in the strength of a woman you almost pushed away, in the family you built from broken pieces. Clara walked to her own room, but paused at the window overlooking the garden. The moon cast silver light across the grass where Sophia had played earlier, and for just a moment she could swear she saw a shadow there, tall, familiar, with Daniel's crooked smile. She blinked, and it was gone, but the feeling remained. A sense of peace, of approval, of closure. "Rest well, my son," she whispered to the night. "Your daughter is safe, your family is whole, and I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all along, that love is stronger than fear, and forgiveness is stronger than pride." The next morning would bring another visit to the cemetery. Another year of remembrance. But it would also bring laughter in the car ride, Sophia's questions about the father she never met, Livia's gentle stories, and Clara's quiet gratitude for second chances. Because that's what this was, she realized. Not a tragedy with a silver lining, but a second chance disguised as loss. A family forged not despite grief, but through it. And as Clara finally climbed into bed that night, for the first time in 5 years, she didn't cry herself to sleep. She smiled. Because tomorrow, she'd wake up to the sound of small footsteps running down the hall, to a child's voice calling "Grandma," to the beautiful chaos of a life she'd almost refused out of fear, and she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. If you made it this far, I have a question for you. What would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have opened your heart, or been too afraid to get attached again? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know. And if you enjoy emotional stories with endings that warm the heart, subscribe to the channel, because there are many more stories like this coming. Oh, and don't forget to like the video. It helps tremendously to bring this message to more people. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next story.